Radio MD.
RadioMD.com.
The world's preeminent talk radio portal.
All about your health.
And now here's Melanie Cole, MS, host of Staying Well.
The Ebola outbreak in Africa is causing a real scare in the United States, and I think the real question is, should we be scared? Is it an outbreak here yet or not really? Just a few isolated cases. My guest is Dr. Erwin Redlener. He's the director of the National Center for Disaster Preparedness. Welcome to the show, Dr. Redlener. So how do you differentiate between flu symptoms and Ebola symptoms, and how is it spread? That's the biggest question.
Well, hi, and glad to be with you. So one of the big challenges is, in fact, differentiating the early signs of Ebola from a lot of other conditions that people get all the time, including flu and measles and, in Africa, malaria and so forth. So we have a challenge here. And how we handle this is we say that there are two triggers to really becoming suspicious that somebody might actually be a case of Ebola. And one trigger is having the exposure. And this is a very important part of the diagnosis because in order to get Ebola, you have to be near Ebola. And for the moment, that means that you have come from one of the countries where Ebola is a serious and growing problem. That would be in the western part of Africa, so Sierra Leone and Guinea and other countries in that region would be places that would trigger at least the question: if you are from those areas, then have you had contact with somebody who might have Ebola, or are you showing evidence of being ill? So if you have flu-like symptoms and you've never been anywhere near those countries or anywhere near anybody that's got them, you're presumed to have flu. But if you have flu-like symptoms and you've been in Sierra Leone or Guinea or Liberia or any of those other countries, then we're going to start by assuming that you may have Ebola and then get the appropriate blood test and rule it in or out. So there are similarities in the initial symptoms, although with many people who have Ebola, the condition deteriorates very rapidly and then they start having organ breakdown, and then you're, of course, in the whole other zone of illness.
So how is it truly spread, Dr. Redlener?
Well, okay, so the spread question has been one of the more predominant issues brought up by almost everybody in my own family to the general public, and everybody wants to know it. And here's the facts as we know them are the following. So Ebola is not spread through the air, period. It cannot be spread through the air. It is spread by direct contact with somebody else who's got infection with Ebola. And it is spread through what's called bodily fluids in polite company, but in fact what we're talking about is blood, vomitus, diarrhea. It could be spread also theoretically from excretions. If you coughed up something or sneezed liquid that might contain Ebola virus, or sweat might contain Ebola virus, but at a much lower concentration than we'd find it in blood, for instance. So the predominant ways of catching, the predominant way is to catch Ebola via the handling of a person or that person's secretions that are contaminated, and this goes for people who've just died also. So people are still contaminated and are contagious basically for several days after death, but that's how people contract this illness.
Does the virus live on surfaces? How long does it live?
On many surfaces, the virus will live for just a few hours. But in, let's say, you have blood that's been dried up on blankets or towels or bedding or something that, or on the person themselves or the body of the person, then we're talking about, 2 or 3 days and as many as 6 or 7 days. So the virus actually remains viable and capable of causing disease under those conditions of in those bodily fluids or on a surface, but the surface is a much shorter lifespan for the virus.
Is there a concern, Dr. Redlener, about it being in food or water spreading the virus?
No, there's not really a concern about it being in the food or water that's spreading the virus. And what would happen is, let's say, in a river where there are people, a lot of people were quite sick with the virus, and they bathed in the river, and whatever, that virus would be so diluted by the time anyone else got to it that it would not be thought to cause a spread of the disease.
So do you think, what are the risks of it spreading in this country? People, should they be scared, Dr. Redlener? And how prepared do you think the U.S. is if it were to start spreading? If that man that came in from Liberia has been in touch with all those children and his family, then they went in touch with people. So is there a concern that it's going to start spreading in this country? And how prepared are we if it does?
Well, there's two parts of our health system in a sense. One is the hospitals and the doctors and the people that provide direct health care to individuals who are sick or who might be sick. Then there's the public health part, and this is relevant to the question you just asked. The public health agencies and professionals, their role is to prevent disease, and when there is disease that may be contagious, is to track contacts of people who may be contagious, and to put a halt to the spread of disease from one contact to the other. In some ways, we're fortunate with Ebola because you can't even spread the disease, even if you're incubating it. If you have it in your body, it takes between 2 and 21 days, and averages around 8 to 10 days before symptoms show up. But the good thing about it is, if there could be such a thing as a good thing about Ebola, is that while you're in the incubation period, in other words, if you have the Ebola in your body but you don't have symptoms, while you're in that phase, you can't transmit it. So it's makes it easier then to identify people who have been in touch or in contact with the sick individual, and then
because they're not sick until they actually contract this disease. I mean, they may have been exposed but not sick and not contagious.
Right. Correct.
Okay, so if someone gets Ebola, are they then immune for life?
They may not be immune for life because there's several strains of Ebola, and you'd probably be immune for life for whatever strain you got, but that wouldn't necessarily protect you from other strains of the virus.
So we only have a minute and a half left, Dr. Redlener. I'd like you to tell the listeners what you really want them to hear about Ebola, being so scared. And again, I didn't let you finish, but are we prepared for this?
So, first of all, it's very normal and appropriate for people to be frightened about a very lethal disease that comes from another part of the world. It has landed here, and very naturally people are worried that this might be spreading. In this case, I don't think we have to worry. We're never going to have, unless something changes dramatically, we're not going to have an epidemic of Ebola in this country. We may have, I think it's likely we'll have some other people come into the country with Ebola who don't know they have it, or we don't know that they have it. There may be some contacts who get it, but it's entirely containable by finding the people, figuring out whether they're sick, and then isolating them. The big problem that I worry about, and the fear that I have, is about epidemics, but it's not about an Ebola epidemic. One of the things that this experience with Ebola has shown
we
us
only have
that,
30 seconds, Dr. Redlener.
Yeah, that we're not really ready to deal with a large-scale outbreak of a serious virus like SARS we had 10 years ago, or bird flu. And there's a lot of work we need to do, and hopefully that'll happen shortly. I think we got a scare in a big way that'll hopefully make us do the things that will allow us to get better prepared than we are right now. But Ebola will not be the culprit behind a major U.S. epidemic.
Great information. Thank you so much. So we don't need to be as scared, and you've just heard it. If you missed any of the great information, listen again on demand or on the go at radiomd.com, and share this show with your friends so they can hear this good information too. This is Melanie Cole. Thanks for listening, and stay well.